well, I'll share a little bit of the same history story that you have, because it's helpful for us to understand how we all got to be here. This is actually my 50th year in the ministry actively. I started in December 1961. In fact, it was fun. I just did a tour of giving lectures in 8 different Unity churches throughout the Midwest, and I went home. I grew up on a farm in Missouri, and I went home, and I was going to go past this little country church that I started serving when I was 18 years old, so I called in advance, and strangely enough, the minister was there, answered the phone, and said, "You won't believe this, but you were the person that brought me here the first time I came to the church." And so they asked me if I would drop by, and I had a little meeting with some of the people who said that I had married them and baptized them and things that I didn't remember at all, but that was true. Actually, you want to think about why all of us are here. And we're all here because there is something inside us that calls us. It's interesting that the ministry is one profession that we really call a calling, that there's something that speaks to us and says several things. One, there's something more than the obvious. You should be involved in finding out more about what this is. And then also that ministry in the sense of wanting to do something to help our brothers and sisters along the path. Actually, I'll tell you quickly how I literally got called. When I was 9 years old, I told my folks I was going to be a minister. And my mother said, well, that was fine with her, but she said, why? And I said, well, I'm too religious not to go to church on Sundays. And seeing how I'm going to go, I'd rather be the one that's up there in front yelling at everybody else. That's not quite true. It's true. I didn't say yelling. So actually I started playing church. Every Sunday afternoon my family would have to come to, I would pass out bulletins and community cups on the organ, and I still have the organ. It still works. It's 60 years old at this point and it still works. But actually something happened when I was 14 that very briefly I was hunting. You wouldn't think hunting is a religious experience because you're going out in the woods to kill something, right? But we all grew up hunting. All farm boys grew up hunting. It was just what you did when you had free time. And there's a thing you do when you hunt that we call freezing. And what you do is you stand perfectly still. And if you stand perfectly still and the animals can't, like if they're not downwind from you, they can't smell you. And some animals don't have too good an eyesight. They get real close to you before they see that you're there. So they don't hear you because you're not tromping through the woods. Hunters wear those camouflaged outfits and they sit in blinds, right? Well, we would just walk into the woods and stand. So one day I'm like 14 years old, I'm hunting, I freeze. And I'm a kid, so I decided to play a game. And the game is, there's nobody here. I don't exist. There's just these eyes kind of mindlessly watching this, recording a scene in the wood, like a camera, mindlessly recording this scene, right? And then, for some reason, I didn't know anything about meditation, but it was like I'd slipped into this other place for a moment. And there really was no hunter hunting, and there was no thinker thinking, and there was just this seeing, just this kind of observing. It was a very kind of wonderfully pure experience. And the thing which brought me back was the thought, what is having this experience? And then this voice said, "Who wants to know?" That's all it said, just who wants to know. Now that's a very interesting question. When anybody would go to see Ramana Maharshi, very often, and they would ask him a question, he would respond by saying, "Who wants to know?" I mean, where's the question? Where's that question coming from? Who is the questioner? Who is it that wants to know? So that led into the ministry, obviously. As I said, I became a minister at the age of 18, which was, you could do that as a small, rural Missouri churches. Couldn't afford to hire ministerial graduates, so they would hire pre-ministerial students or retired ministers, one of the two. And it was sort of an accident. I won't go into explaining the accident, that how it happened at 18. So then I went to Southern California. It was a school of theology in Claremont. I did my master's in theology out there. Served as the assistant pastor of a large church in Claremont. Not in Claremont. I went to school in Glendale, which Darren knows where Glendale is, on Colorado Boulevard, which I'm sure you know very well. And I was a chaplain at a women's prison for a while, and at also a girls' school. Came here to start working on a doctorate, got a job as a pastor of a church in Brooklyn. When I was growing up on the farm in Missouri, if somebody had told me I would be pastor of a church in Brooklyn for 10 years, I would have thought Alaska maybe, not Brooklyn. Anyway, it was a beautiful church. It was something out of the New England countryside, plopped down right in the middle of Brooklyn, between Prospect Park and Greenwood Cemetery. And was 10 really good years. During those same 10 years, I worked on a doctorate here just down the street at the New School University here. And I also taught there for 10 years, from 1969 through 1979, courses. And it was a wonderful time. It was the 70s, and everything was kind of mod, and in the dawning of the age of Aquarius, and there were all these psychedelic shops around and strange smells in the air. But it was a really exciting time. So I was teaching courses on esoteric philosophies and mystical philosophies, and they were well attended, and it was really nice. But when I came to New York, I grew up in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, of which there's only one in all of New York City, which Beth now belongs to.
We founded it today.
And it's where you will be ordained on June 16th, 2013. It's called Park Avenue Christian Church. It's a beautiful church on Park Avenue and 68th Street. So when I came to New York, I had a master's degree in theology. They didn't need a pastor, so I became a Methodist minister. And I did that for 28 years. And then when I left the Methodist Church, Diane Burke, who heads up One Spirit Seminary, and I founded Interfaith Fellowship. We had services in Cami Hall, which was a piano recital hall across the street from Carnegie Hall. Beth attended, Lynn attended, Shanti attended. How I got involved with the seminary very briefly was when I was teaching the classes on esoteric and mystical philosophies. I designed a course with a section on the Kabbalah, but I knew nothing about the Kabbalah. And a mutual friend told me about Rabbi Gelberman. And so I called the rabbi, asked if he'd come speak to the class on the Kabbalah, which he did. And I remember thinking at the end of that I still didn't have any idea what the Kabbalah was about.
You were happy.
Well, yeah, one of the things was, he actually got my class up clicking their fingers and dancing. And I thought, well, that was kind of interesting and experience. So after that, the rabbi and I became friends. I had him come speak at my church in Brooklyn. I came and gave talks at the little synagogue here in New York City. And then Shanti in '81 suggested that he start classes, and he came to me with this idea of starting the new seminary and would I help him. And I kind of just played along in the beginning because I thought, well, I like this guy, I'll help him, but I didn't know really, but he hit on something. Actually, he hit on something that's really important because we got notice recently, there's a fellow that's coming out with a book, Kurt, what's the name, Interreligious, what's the title of the book?
Kurt Johnson.
What's the title of the book? Interspiritual something, right?
Yeah, he likes that word.
Yeah, it's interspiritual, but it's representative of what's happening in the world, and we see it a lot later on. Maybe not today, maybe today. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of the way religion is changing worldwide, but more specifically in terms of the thing that's going on here in this country where we're experiencing a lot of diversity. Mainline Protestant churches have been dying very, very rapidly. The church that I grew up in, the Disciples of Christ, has lost half of its membership in the past 50 years. Other churches on the average are losing about 1% per year, which is actually a very rapid death. I mean, it's really, I just read an article yesterday that said the Methodist Church, which I was a minister for a number of years, is losing 1,000 members per week on the average, right? Nationwide. That's pretty rapid, right? Even the Baptist Church, which we would think of as which is the largest Protestant denomination in the United States, lost 3% of their membership in the last 10 years. That's not as rapid a death as some of the others are experiencing, but it is a downward rather than an upward. And of course, the biggest one of all is the Catholics, who are just really tumbling. The thing which saved the Catholic Church has been the influx of Latinos into the United States. And if it actually hadn't been for that influx of Latinos, it would have been even much more dramatic than it already is. Although a lot of Latinos now, interesting enough, are switching over to evangelical, like Pentecostal churches, which they're finding more interesting. But we'll talk about that a bit later on. The point is that there's a growing interest in interfaith concerns. The realization that things must be universal. By the way, how many of you here are students of the Course in Miracles or have been influenced by the Course? All right, so that's what Margaret was asking me a moment ago. You'd never heard of the Course in Miracles, and you'll, as I said, you're going to be hearing a lot more about it. The Course regards itself, it says it's one form of a universal theology. And it really is, what we're really looking at here is what's universal, what connects us, what brings us all together, because it's really, there is only one Spirit. I mean, there's only one thing which does unite us. There's only one God. There's only one truth. There's only one reality. And we're all a part of that, but what brought you here is that you wanted to know more about that. And not just know more about that, but also know how that you might be of service in that capacity as well. To just give you a little example of how things have changed, 4 years ago, when I was in Southern Cal doing a talk, I went by the seminary where I'd gone to school in Claremont. It's really one of the better seminaries, it's in the top 20 of the best seminaries in the United States. And I said to them, I actually had just sort of stumbled into being able to have a chat with the chancellor, the dean of the whole place. And I said, do you have any classes here on mysticism? I had just come out with the book, What is Mysticism? An earlier draft of that. And he said, no, there's no classes on mysticism. I said, do you have any classes here on inter-religious relationships? Is there anything on Judaism or Islam? He He said, no, we don't have any of those kind of classes here. 2 years ago, I was back there again, and exactly the same thing happened. And I went by, and I didn't get to see the chancellor this time, but I was talking to the guy who was the head of alumni affairs, and he says, well, we've recently introduced courses in mysticism, and we have courses now in inter-religious affairs. There's a thing on Islam. And do you know where Claremont? You know where Claremont is. It's on Colorado Boulevard. Just the same.
Headed toward Pasadena.
Pardon?
Headed toward Pasadena.
Yeah, it's this. It's east of Pasadena. Anyhow, so things are changing, but they're changing. There's fewer and fewer people that are really looking to go into the active Protestant Catholic. There are fewer and fewer nuns all the time. Actually, according to what's called the Pew Forum research, you can look this up online. The largest growing segment of people in the United States now are nuns. That's spelled N-O-N-E. Meaning they have no religious affiliation. Right? That's the largest, fastest growing segment are nuns. That's what they say when they're asking us. They have no religious affiliation. But that doesn't mean that there's not a spiritual thing about. When I was growing up on the farm in Missouri during the 40s and the 50s, on Sunday morning, my mother, my sister, and I would go to church. My dad went fishing. And it never really occurred to me until later in life that that was Daddy's church. I mean, he couldn't say, okay, you guys go, I want to go be by myself back by the bass pond, right? I'm going to get away from the farm and the responsibilities for a while, right? He couldn't say, I'm going to go meditate, right? So he had to go. Thoreau once said, many men go fishing all their lives without realizing it's not fish they're after. You know, you're just looking to get into nature by yourself for a while. You got to have an excuse to go. You can't go just sit and meditate. So you take a fishing pole, right, or whatever it is that one does. It's golf or or whatever they do, right? So now we're going to turn and we're going to look at this chart. But you all have this chart. If you don't, I have some more here. Pass them around. Here, pass that around. Anybody that doesn't have one?
Have you got one?
It's also in the book. What is mysticism?
It is in the book. It is.
Yeah, it's one of the pages in the book. It's a Xerox from the book.
John, do you have any more?
Yeah, there's some passing around. Oh, okay. Pardon?
This is my own thing. I know I have it in my book. I just
Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over this chart with you.
Anyone else need a chart?
This, it's also in the book. You can just turn to the page in the book. I think it's 27?
21.
21? Okay. This chart, by the way, will be on your final exam. It's the only written part on your exam. Final exam is oral except for this. You will be handed a blank copy of this, and you will be expected to fill in all of this information. Okay? So you're already being told now, there's no surprise, just learn what goes into these spaces. All right? So I'm going to do this historically. By that I mean I'm going to start with the oldest tradition and kind of work up to the present time. So of course the oldest one that would be on this list is clear at next 3 up from the bottom, which are tribal or shamanic religions. So it's difficult, it's impossible to say at what point it was that we began to become more aware that there's a spiritual nature to us. According to the Course in Miracles, there's no one in whom there's not spirit. That's really looking to re-identify itself in its fullness, to recognize its eternity, that it's a part of something greater. We call it God. God is just a word that we cannot define because words really don't work. The Course says where there's symbols of symbols twice removed from reality. Probably the best definition we have of God that's true for every one of the words